There are approximately 32 million small to medium-sized businesses in the country. These businesses are Americans' most important job creators, all facing many of the same challenges. Supply bottlenecks, high inflation, highest in 40 years, increasing interest rates, and the Great Resignation. How do these problems impact new business startups and the sale of existing businesses? Well, to address these and other questions is our guest, Jim Afinowich, partner and designated broker at IBG Fox and Finn Financial Group, M&A intermediaries from Scottsdale, Arizona. Jim, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Garry.
Indeed. How long have you been in the business, Jim?
About 35 years.
And what possessed you? What was the attraction?
I was an entrepreneur. I owned a number of different businesses, bought and sold companies, and in the end decided I liked doing transactions better than I did running businesses. And I've 35 years, I've never gotten bored.
Well, that's great to hear. How many businesses have you sold in that 35 years? Have you stopped counting?
Our organization has sold something between 11 and 1,200 companies across the United States. Now,
No kidding.
not all of those are myself personally, but there's
Sure.
a group of professionals, and I can't name all 1,100 of them, but I know it's been over 1,100.
What would you say is the most unique business that you've sold?
Unique business. We sell a lot of different companies that the owners, sellers, buyers wish that they remain confidential. So we don't talk about a lot of them. But I think probably one of the most fun and unique that I can talk about was a company called Alpine Valley Bread. That was a company, and it's really as much a story about the entrepreneur, the owner of the businesses, as it is the business itself. The gentleman, and I can talk about this because it was purchased by a public company. Those records are public with SEC filings, but the owner of this business was 20 years ago was a salesman for Xerox. And he decided he wanted to leave the corporate world and own his own business. So he started a little bakery in a strip center. And he would go in at 3 o'clock in the morning and he would bake his bread. And he did healthy bread. Now, this is a few years ago, and he did non-GMO breads and organic breads. And then when he got done baking, he went home and he slept during the day. And his wife and his daughter came in and they worked the counter. And then they would go home and he'd go back and work the night shift. Well, the company grew and grew over a period of time. And about 20 years after starting that, we sold the company. He wasn't baking his own bread anymore. He had other people doing that. He had several hundred employees, but we were able to sell that company for $120 million.
No kidding. Now that is progress and success.
That is.
That's a great
That's one
story,
of
Jim.
that's one of my favorite ones,
Indeed.
classic American entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Are there certain types of businesses that you prefer not to list, that you just don't want to have anything to do with? Certain industries, for example, or
Not so much industries, but characteristics of the business.
what would some of those characteristics be?
Well, every business that we see that comes to us has one of two things. They either have a story or they have earnings and profits. And I prefer to sell the businesses that have profits rather than the ones that have no profit but a great story.
Sure, I could see that. Interesting. Jim, who regulates your industry?
It's changed by state. About 50% of the states in the United States require that you have a real estate license to sell a business. Even though the owner may not own the real estate, he may be leasing it. A lot of real estate departments will look at a lease as in the similar way as the sale of property. You're just selling the use of that property for a specified period of time. So about half the states require a real estate license.
So I
If you
guess the
have a securities transaction, a stock sale, then that is governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And for transactions like that, you need to have a securities license.
I see. So for the on the real estate side, where you have to have a real estate license, I guess that's because of, as you said, they either own their building or they're leasing it. In
Correct.
in most cases, it's one or the other. So I guess my assumption from that then is that when you sell the business, you're selling the building, or you're attempting to transfer the lease into the new owner's name.
Yes, you're
Thus
either
the
selling the
requirement.
building or you're doing a lease transfer. Sometimes that's a renegotiation of the lease. A lot of times when there's a new owner coming in, the landlord's very anxious to reduce the rent for the new owner. And I mean that facetiously. Uh,
Of course.
so there is a negotiation and a transfer of the terms of a lease. A lot of times there's an extension of the lease.
It's my understanding that Fox and Finn is pretty diversified. You sell a variety of businesses, including aviation companies, correct?
That is correct.
Do you have a personal preference? What kind of business do you personally like to get involved in?
Personally, I like aviation businesses. Flying has been a passion, hobby, addiction for me for years. So I enjoy that. But part of what I enjoy about the industry that I'm in is that I get to learn about a lot of different businesses. What we're really experts at isn't so much a particular business, but it's the process of selling a business, identifying the value of that business, finding the best fit buyer for the business, negotiating the transaction, and then making sure that it gets closed. And I'm still, after 35 years, I'll see businesses that I never even dreamed existed before, making lots of money. So I love the business of business and getting to see lots of different kinds and learn about them. To sell a business, we need to understand that business almost as well as the owner, and that education process of why that business works. That's exciting. That's fun.
Sure. You mentioned something that caught my interest when you mentioned value. To what extent does your company get involved in pricing a business, or does the business owner, when they've decided to sell, have they pretty well set their mind on what they perceive to be the correct value?
Most of the time, business owners have a perceived value for their business. Um,
Accurately?
and no, it is consistently inaccurate. Now, most of the time, their perceived value is higher than what it may actually be. And sometimes it's lower. Sometimes owners will say, okay, I've talked to my financial planner. This is how much I need to retire. So that's what I've got to sell my business for. Or I want to buy a boat and this is the cost of the boat. So that's what I've got to sell my business for.
Sure. Well, how do you go about determining, how does your company go about determining the value, a realistic sales value of a company?
It's similar to selling real estate. If you're selling a house, a real estate agent's going to subscribe to databases. They're going to look at market comps. They're going to say, every house in your neighborhood that's the same square footage of your house sold in this range. So we do that with businesses. Now, no two businesses are exactly alike, like homes are,
Sure.
but we can get a pretty good idea. And for the most part, it comes down to a multiple of earnings. How much business, how much profit does that business make? Some businesses sell for higher multiples of earnings than others. So, depending on the size of the business, what I would call Main Street businesses, smaller businesses, you determine a price ahead of time. You're realistic. You look at comps, you look at the market, what other things are selling for. A very good sanity check is to go to a banker that does SBA loans. SBA loans are a very good way to finance small businesses. So if you go to your banker and you say, I want to sell my company, here are my financials, what would you lend on this business?
Hmm.
That's a good sanity check sometimes. Now,
Well, in the, I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
larger transactions, and I'm talking about deals that may be 5 million to hundreds of millions of dollars. Those types of businesses you're not going to get an SBA loan for because they're too large. And typically we go to market without a price. We try and get multiple buyers, we get multiple offers, and that gives you a pretty good idea of where the value is.
I see. Well, kind of following that up, uh, if the business consists of the business itself and real estate, so do you include the price of the real estate, or is that negotiated separately?
Depends on the buyer. Some buyers want to buy real estate and some do not. But you have to make sure that the financials of the business represent a fair market rate for rent. Oftentimes, owners will own the real estate, they'll sell the business, and they'll say, well, I want a steady income, so I'll keep the real estate and I'll rent it to the new buyer.
Hmm.
Well, you have to set the rent not based upon what your boat payment is, but you need to set the rent based upon what a comparable market rent is.
Sure. What type of business sells the fastest? Is there one particular industry that just kind of flies off the shelf, so to speak?
It's really not a particular industry. It's how well the business is priced, how clean the business is, how motivated the seller is. It's imagine selling a car and you decide that you want to buy a Chevrolet pickup truck and you read the ads and you find the same model truck with the same mileage from six different sellers and one is selling for 20% less than the other ones. Which is going to go faster? The one that's priced properly.
Sure.
And if they're all priced properly, it's going to be the one with less dents in it and less mileage. Now, in a business, we don't talk about dents and mileage. We talk about hair on the deal. What complications are there
Does
for
that
the
mean risk?
Yes, it is all a matter of risk and return. You
Hmm.
know,
Of
where
course.
a buyer places a value is directly proportionate to the risk that they see in the business. The less risk, the higher the price and the
Of
easier
course.
it's going to sell.
Sure. What is the most difficult type of business to sell, other than an unprofitable one?
Well, unprofitable, but yes, and that's certainly the number one thing. But businesses that have problems, as an example, if the owner does all of the sales of the business, has all of the customer relations, that's very difficult to sell because the business is based upon that customer.
Sure, one man operation.
Right. If a business has 80% of its income from one customer, that's very difficult to sell.
That
So
makes sense. Sure.
if you go to buy a horse, which is going to be the hardest or the easiest horse to buy? It's going to be the healthiest horse.
Of course.
Same thing with the business. How healthy is the business?
As determined by profitability.
As determined by profitability, but other aspects. Again, you could have two businesses that are each making $1 million. And I've had this happen where one owner says, "Oh, I am so proud of my business. I work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. I haven't been taken a vacation in 5 years. I'm dedicated." And the next business makes the same thing. And the owner said, "Yeah, I've got a good management team in place. I work 15, 20 hours a week. I don't need to work that much, but I like to go into the office a couple days a week." They both have the same profit. Now, as a buyer, do you want to work 15 or 20 hours a week, or do you want to not take a vacation for five?
Uh, point well taken. Indeed. How should a company go about preparing itself for sale? What advice do you give potential new clients? What should they do to prepare for this ultimate sale at maximum value?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers that may sound contradictory. One is run the business like you're never going to sell it, like you're going to hold on to it forever. So if you would buy a new delivery truck because you're going to own it for 10 years and that's needed, go ahead and buy it. Don't say, "Well, let the new guy buy the truck. I'll give him the old one." And the other side of that coin is run the business like you're going to sell it tomorrow. Always have your business ready to sell. Always assume that. So take care of the issues that we have talked about. Have management in place. Don't have a concentration of customers. Have good financial accounting systems. Make sure that you have clean books. There are expenses in a business that I'll call gray expenses. Maybe I had a construction company and the owner had a company Ferrari. And the company paid for the car. He wrote it off. Now, I'm not sure how many bags of cement you can deliver in the passenger seat of a Ferrari.
So that's the gray expense you're talking about.
Right. Take it off the books. Clean up your books ahead of time. Uh, that makes it not only sellable, but bankable.
Sure. That sounds like good advice, Jim. I've read that up to 60% of listed businesses never sell. Is that true?
I've heard that number can be as high as 80%.
Really?
Yes.
And why is that? Is that for reasons that we've just discussed? They're not ready to go to market, so to speak.
That's for the reasons that we've discussed primarily. Some businesses just can't be sold. You have one customer. You are the only employee of the business or the only salesman of the business. It's the things that we've talked about. Now, I'm a little biased when I say this, but sometimes the reasons they don't sell is because the owner is trying to do it themselves. Selling a
I
business
see.
is a full-time job. Having a broker do it for you generally is going to help your success rate over trying to do it yourself. And again, I acknowledge that I have a bias there, but I see that. But other reasons businesses don't sell is fantasy logic, overpriced. Uh, I've talked to owners and I've said, I've got somebody interested in buying a business like yours. Would you be interested in selling it? And they say, of course, everything's for sale for the right price. So, translation, if you pay me more than it's worth, of course, I'll sell it.
Sure.
So, overpricing is also a reason, one of the main reasons businesses don't sell.
It makes sense. How competitive is your business? How competitive is business brokerage?
I think it is fairly competitive. There depends on the market that you're in. Some markets are more competition than others. I don't feel my real competition are other brokers like me. I think my real competition is people trying to sell the business themselves that don't know what they're doing.
How long does it take to sell a typical business?
Depends on the size of the business. A Main Street business, something under a couple $1 million, 3 to 6 months. A business that's going to sell for several $1 million, on average, about 12 months. So 6 to 12 months would be my broad range.
Mm-hmm. How do you how do you go about marketing a listing? I assume it's not like selling a house or a building where you put a for sale sign out front of the facility. It's in some cases I would assume it's a little more discretionary and discreet than that. But what are some of the marketing steps you go through?
Well, you're right. You don't put a sign out in front of the business. One main thing that's very important in the sale of any business is maintaining confidentiality. You don't want your customers knowing your business is for sale. You don't
Why
want your,
not? Why does that matter?
well, I am going to buy something from you that costs a lot of money and I'm giving you a 3 year warranty. And you're talking to one of my competitors. And they say, well, I'm giving you a 2 year warranty. And the customer says, well, Jim's going to give me a 3 year warranty. They laugh and go, yeah. Did you know he's selling his business and moving to Mexico?
I
You know,
see.
how are you going
Okay.
to collect on that warranty?
Of course.
Um,
That makes
so,
sense.
and you don't want your employees knowing the business is for sale. Employees assume the worst. It's just human nature. I like working for Garry. He's a great guy, but I don't know who's going to come in. I'm probably going to lose my job. They assume that their job is going to go away. Today's market, one of the key assets we have is employees. So if your employees think the business is for sale, they're going to go start looking for new jobs because
Indeed.
they can't afford to be unemployed. And guess who's going to get a new job first? Your best employees.
Of course.
So
Good
I'll
point.
come back in to answer your question. How do you market the business? You do it confidentially. There, for smaller businesses, there are websites that people go to. For the companies that we sell, larger companies, I never run an ad for it any place. We put together lists of people and companies that we think are good buyers, and we contact them. But in every case, you may say, I have an XYZ business located in the Southwest. The buyer contacts you, you have them sign a confidentiality agreement. a non-disclosure agreement. And then you screen that buyer. Okay, you've signed my confidentiality agreement. Now, how are you going to pay for this business? Oh, well, I'm going to give you $10 down and I want you to carry a mortgage for 20 years. Yeah, I don't think I need to talk to that person.
Sure. So
So
it sounds like the business broker has a pretty high level of responsibility to qualify the buyer before you get too
absolutely,
far down the road.
absolutely. That's one of the first things that you have to do. Now, this may sound sexist, but some women love to go window shopping, love to go to clothes stores, look at clothes, and they look at a lot more than they buy. There are men, and now, and I'll put female entrepreneurs in the same category who love to shop for businesses. It's kind of fun to see what businesses are for sale and what they're asking and what they're earning. Imagine you are in the hardware business. And if I called you and said, hey, Gary, I'm in the same business you are. How would you like to see my financial statements, know who my suppliers are, know who my customers are, and know how much I pay my employees? You'd say, oh, I'd love to know
Yeah,
all of
absolutely.
it. Yeah. Oh, I decided not to buy the business, but thanks for the information.
Sure.
So lots of people like to shop. They gather information. And that's why you have to qualify them. Are they a shopper or are they a
Or they're a
buyer?
serious buyer. Sure. How do you go about finding new listings?
Most of what we get for clients today is based upon referral. We do some marketing, but in my firm, most of it is referral.
Is it true that financing a business sometimes is challenging and difficult, and that's one reason that perhaps SBA may be a good source because they're adding a certain degree of strength to the bank lender. Is that a
Yes,
fair assumption?
that is a very fair assumption. Most lenders are asset based lenders. They're going to say, what do you have for collateral? Now, let's look at all your equipment and we're going to give you some percentage of your asset value. The government wants to promote business ownership. So, through the Small Business Administration, they make loans available that are cash flow based rather than asset based. And they give good terms. 10-year terms is a typical SBA loan. So they are looking strictly at cash flow and repayment ability rather than collateral. Now, in fact, SBA is not lending the money directly. It's banks that are lending money, but the Small Business Administration is in effect a co-signer on your loan.
I see.
They will guarantee typically 75% of the loan value to the bank. So if you qualify for the bank's criteria and SBA's criteria, you go into a deal and the bank knows that if you default, they can go back and collect 75% of the unpaid loan from the federal government. So Uncle Sam is your co-guarantor in an
I see.
SBA loan.
So, do these loan programs include not only the business but also uh, financing for the real estate as well? Or are they both or one or the other?
No, they're both. There are two different programs. The business is typically under what's called the 7A program. Real estate is financed under the 504 loan program. And I don't want to get too complicated, but they will finance not only the real estate, they'll finance the business, and they'll finance the working capital necessary to operate that business.
As we all know, the Federal Reserve has recently increased interest rates. The philosophy seems to be consistent for the rest of the year. We're told that there may be two or three or even four more increases. As interest rates go up, what impact does this have on a business for sale or the business price for sale?
As interest rates go up, they go up across every lending platform. So an SBA loan, the interest rate's going to go up. Again, the bank is actually the lender. SBA is the guarantor. And it really comes down to cash flow. How much can this business afford? Now, it doesn't make, if the business can afford a payment of $5,000 a month, it makes no difference how much of that payment is interest and how much is principal. So as interest rate, but the business can only afford to pay $5,000 a month in this example. So as the interest goes up, the principal has to go down.
Sure.
So rising interest rates are going to lower the value of the business.
So, like on commercial property, as interest rates go up, the selling price or potential value of that property tends to suffer and goes down some.
That is exactly
Fair
correct.
assumption.
Yep.
Well, Jim, we only have time for a couple more questions. And is it better to buy a business or start a business?
I have done both in my life multiple times. And buying a business, I'll have some potential buyers say, well, I'm paying this much more than asset value. Why don't I just start it instead of buying it? And if you start a business, you're going to lose money for some period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to break even for some period of time. And then you're going to make a little bit of money for some period of time. And then you're going to make a little more money for some period of time. And how much those periods of time are and what the dollars are very hard to determine. I think it's better to buy a business where you've got historic cash flow, where you can step right in and make money immediately. You can say, this business has averaged these earnings for the last 3 years. They're continuing to grow. Here's what my debt service is, and I've got money to pay myself. So the premium in buying over starting is kind of like success insurance in my mind.
Well, that makes sense on the surface. Jim, if a person comes to you seeking advice about becoming a business broker, what do you tell them? What's your fatherly advice to a potential new employee?
Being a business broker, you're part salesman, you're part accountant, you're part psychologist. There's a lot of different aspects to it. But the first thing that I would look for is accounting and finance ability. And a buyer comes to me, I'm going to digress and I'll come back to this, but someone comes to me and says, I want to own a business. And I'll say, okay, how much accounting have you had in your life? Have you ever had an accounting class? What do you understand about finance? I know you're an expert at widgets, but you need to be able to read and understand a financial statement. And if you don't have that experience, go to a community college and take a couple classes in accounting, and then come back and look at buying a business. I'd say the same thing for a business broker. Someone that wants to be a broker, another thing I would tell them is that you need to have enough money in your bank account to pay your living expenses for at least a year before you start.
Mm-hmm.
Because if average sale takes a year, it may take a year till they get paid. You got to have enough working capital in the bank. Being a business broker is owning your own small business. So my advice to the business broker is the same as my advice to a small business owner. Be
Well, it
proper.
sounds like there are a lot of skill sets that are similar to a commercial real estate agent. Understanding accounting, managerial and tax accounting, understanding values, cap rates, and obviously you have to have a real estate license. So it sounds like there's a lot of similarities. I guess that's probably a fair assumption, isn't it?
That is a fair assumption. There are a lot of similarities.
Well, Jim, we're out of time. I want to thank you for your time and your advice and counsel. And that's it for today's program. Thanks to our guest, Jim Afinowich, partner and designated broker at IBG Fox and Finn Financial Group, M&A Intermediaries, Scottsdale, Arizona. That concludes this episode of Stringham Real Estate Edge. Today's program was brought to you by Stringham Schools, educating real estate professionals since 1989. Visit stringhamschools.com to learn more. We want to thank today's guests, and don't forget to tell us what you think in the comments section below. I'm Garry Barnes, and I'll see you on the next episode of Stringham Real Estate Edge.